Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 84 and we're back to the era of fixed camera angles and tank controls to retrospectively review Resident Evil 0. My name is Sai and joining me on the panel this week, Resident Evil 0 may or may not be the result of his monkey paw wish for the series to reuse the zapping systems. Claims are unfounded. Steamforged Games' Sherwin Matthews.
Yeah, that's right. I am a monkey.
When I asked if he wanted to be on the RE0 pod, he gave an enthusiastic thumbs up and then dropped everything he was holding to the floor in the living room, and it's all very shiny in there now. It's Moist Owlet, aka James.
What's the shine from?
That's when the items, they shine, don't they?
Oh, right, yes. Carry on.
Silly. And of course, say the line, Steve.
Oh, so much pressure. And the world will burn in an inferno of hate.
It's my button, Steve Valance. First Aid Spray is recorded in front of a live Discord server audience, so join now to hear the show early and unedited and to become part of our wonderful little community where we discuss life, the universe, and Resident Evil. You can find the server and all of our social media links at our website, faspraypod.com. That's where you can find our merchandise store and our Patreon page. First Aid Spray is nothing without our supporters. Tiers begin at just $1 a month with a host of benefits. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod to support the show. In terms of content from us, we did drop the latest episode of Not Recommended, Resident Evil 4's reviews reviewed, which is now on YouTube, which you can check out, and there are episodes of that show, I believe, in the pipeline as well. And also, I know we just dropped a bunch of shows, but we are tinkering away on another idea right now, so watch this space. We have very minimal news, which is great, because Steve, I believe we have some fairly big headlines to get into.
The big one, absolutely breaking news. Resident Evil has released via GOG on PC, with Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 to follow.
It's a bit of a surprise announcement, really, wasn't it? Kind of woke up one day and there it was. Everyone's been talking about getting a classic collection, including us, for a very long time. This is only on PC for now. You have to wonder whether it's come to console in some form down the road. The understanding, I think, is that GOG, good old games.com, I think it is, went to Capcom, went, look, we want to do this, and Capcom just approved it. I don't think this was made in-house by Capcom, but hopefully it leads to more in the future. The important thing is Resident Evil 1, the classic PC version, or one of the classic PC versions, is now very available with 2 and 3 to follow. Very exciting times. It was nice to see everyone mostly be happy about this. I guess we can get into that. But James, as the biggest PC player, I guess, what's your reaction to this?
I don't have it yet, but I will get it. Yeah, I made a post that day about how happy we all were. Well, most of the community was about getting a collection. It's something that everybody's been wanting, and it means that people can get off my back about Resident Evil 3 Remake as well. But I do want to bring, because for some reason people came for me. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But yeah, I just want to remind folks that, we had no idea this was happening, and it came out of the blue, and we were also happy about it. So let's try and keep that, like, things under wraps and secret, so we can all be surprised and happy about things again, because all we've been getting the past few years is just little snail trails of things like being released and leaked and rumored, and it makes the final product just lesser. Let's stop doing that and start doing what happened a week ago. Was it a week ago? It was a week and a half ago or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was fairly recent. You're absolutely right. Like, everything under the sun in terms of Resident Evil has been quote unquote leaked or rumored or whatever. Every game, every remake ever is coming out. 9, Revelations 3, they've all been talked about in the last couple of years or even the last couple of months. Even all that aside, it was nice to actually have a genuine surprise. Like, somehow it navigated all of everyone saying, well, they're doing all of this. And yes, suddenly one day, boop, Resident Evil 1 on PC. Very nice indeed. I did purchase it immediately. It seemed like it runs pretty smooth from my experience, but I didn't get too deep into it. Showing any reaction to classic RE games on PC?
Yes, they exist.
Yes, they exist.
That's all I've got. That's all I've got for you.
Fair.
No, I think... it's... Yeah, I kind of assumed that people were playing them on PC anyway, regardless. It's just It is, isn't it?
Now they don't have to emulate them, I guess.
Exactly it. I think I kind of, it's very muted, like woohoo, because it literally is something that's already happening everywhere. It's not like it never existed in this medium before. So
yeah, that's fair. Steve, what are your thoughts on RE1 on GOG?
Much like the Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4 ports for iOS, it's always good to have more games on more storefronts. And I have nothing but like appreciation for GOG basically going to Capcom going, oh, look, we can put this on PC. You know, I don't know why it was GOG who made them actually finally get the nudge to get it released on PC, but it being available legally on modern storefronts as opposed to everyone who's been just emulating it and like going, oh, I've got the PS1 version, it's all right. Technically, it's not. The PC version is actually a different version. Minutia in the details, legally speaking, you can now legally own it again. From what I understand, it's now moddable. It's compatible with stuff like Biohazard and the Seamless HD and stuff. So, you know, much like the previous episode with the fan modders who we had on, like Aiden and a little special Polly Colin, the modders went straight in and they've been doing bits of work. And I believe while me and Sai had no real issues running the game, there have been stuttering issues. And Aiden, who was on the podcast last time, literally is part of the reason why it now runs smoothly in a current update. So if you have if you downloaded it off of GOG without GOG Galaxy, you might want to go re-download it and it'll run a bit smoother for your machine.
That's good.
Not to just, you know, grab the mic and keep rambling, but the sentiment I think has been a bit strange because the second this was announced, the initial gut punch was for everyone going, yay, it's available legally, finally, Classic Collection in some form is happening. The immediate response is, why isn't there a console version? And I'm gonna tip my hat and be optimistic for a second and say, look, that the reason we got Resident Evil 2 remake is because the remasters of RE1 and 0 sold pretty well. So if these do well, I feel like it's like, you know, the domino, getting the ball rolling. So don't be all like just chewing Capcom's head off. And to be fair, they need a bit of a nudge maybe, but don't like be obnoxious.
Big time.
You know?
Some of the negative reaction to this was quite unfortunate, really. Like, it was nice to see people celebrate it, but just as quickly people were off to the races to complain about it not being on console. Fair enough, I do understand it, but it's not available to you. But you be polite about that, and also be polite about asking about Steam and stuff like that. I do sort of get it, but there's also a lot of people that were like, well, you've missed a trick here. You could have done this and that with it. You know, you could have optimized it here. You could have HD texture packed it here. It's like, just take what you're given for now. Like, we were starving for this for so long, and immediately people were like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Like, oh, come on.
I mean, I would have loved the bells and whistles version. It's like, you know, seamless HD and everything, but the fact that it's the pure vanilla experience is also good as well, because that's pure preservation right there. Just making it so you can run the original base version on your PC. You know, it's still 4x3. It's still got the terrible FPS cutscenes, but they're all in colour, and you get the dum-dum guns. You even get Chris's crazy shotgun. You know, it's pretty good.
As you said, all the mods are still available, and they now work on this. And Capcom historically don't stamp on those kinds of mods anyway. Like, if that was an issue, we'd already know, and they would already be going to bat to take these things down. That's not happened. So, yeah, you can pick these versions up and make them prettier, or do whatever else you want with them, with the mods that are already out there. So, I get it. I understand there could be more to this. Hopefully there's more to this down the line. Vote with your wallet. Suggest to Capcom's the thing that you'd like to see, but the whining was a little bit unfortunate.
Speaking of things you'd like to see, Capcom did their next showcase, and I guess they politely and very subtly teased that they're working on a new Resident Evil game. So no one's surprised.
I didn't watch this. I just tuned in at the right exact moment when they just said, by the way, we're making a new Resident Evil. So it was hilarious timing on my part. The words from Koshi Nakanishi, who previously directed Revelations 1 and Resident Evil 7, was, it was really difficult to figure out what to do after Resident Evil 7, but I found it, and to be honest, it feels substantial. I can't share any details just yet, but I hope you're excited for the day that I can. So no idea how far off this is. Presumably, this is a Resident Evil 9. It at least sounds like it's going to be a new story, because he said new direction. We're not just doing a remake. But the way they talk about it as a follow-up to 7 and substantial progression from that gameplay, and him, Nakanishi being in the director's chair for it, makes me think that it is the next mainline installment. I mean, yeah, they were always going to make another Resident Evil. It's, again, no one's surprised, but it was quite exciting to be like, okay, good. We do have a new game on the way. It's not just all the millions of remakes that everyone is leaking and rumouring and chatting about. So, yeah, Steve, what's your reaction to this other than just cool? Anything else?
Honestly, yeah, no, just cool. The fact that this man has been a solid bet for Resident Evil games. Like, Revelations 2, Resident Evil 7... pretty much two solid banger titles there. I mean, a lot of people would say Revelations 2 you could skip, but I would personally say it's part of the upswing after 6's downturn. And 7, I think out of the recent RE Engine titles, is still probably considered the best. Yeah. Like, maybe RE2 clinches it, but that is also a remake. So yeah, I'm excited to see, but this is purely speculation. Say it is Resident Evil 9. Say it's picking up directly after the cliffhanger of Village. I kind of feel like if there was ever going to be an action-focused set-piece game, it's got. I'm fearing a stock market crash. Sorry, is what I'm saying. I'm fearing that the plot hook we've set up is going to just rip out from under us. I'm all for a horror experience. I kind of feel like this is the time for a bit more of a crazy one.
I hope that this is closer to coming along than it perhaps could be. We didn't see anything, obviously, or anything like that. It's not like Capcom these days to announce games super far out. Like, usually with the Resident Evil games, we kind of get a first trailer, and then the game comes out within sort of the next 6 months. There isn't usually an announcement before that, so it's kind of hard to pass where this is. Village was 2021, so we're already 3.5 years since that came out, so be nice to follow up on some of the stuff left hanging there and that kind of thing. But yeah, massively agree, to be honest. 7 is such a great example of a Resident Evil game as a blueprint, if nothing else. To have the same director kind of spearheading the next direction is a good thing for me. James, where do you sit with this one?
I just because there's a lot of wording he said which could literally mean anything.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm not going to deep dive into what he said, and it is exciting. I just hope, because they brought him on and he worked on 7, which then led into Village, which were 2 consistent titles. I just hope we get more consistency with this next title. I hope like he takes what he built in 7, because there's still a lot of unexplainable stuff in 7. And he doesn't need to explain it, obviously, and the game doesn't need to explain it, but just go deeper into it and make it, and because the next title is 10. And that's got to be a big one. Right? So if you kind of take, 7 and 8, they did really well with those games, but still with a lot of questions. Set up 9 to then set up 10, and give us like a big entry, which probably won't come for the next 10, 12 years. But I'm like, I want consistency. Give us consistency, because we had it once and then it just petered away. I want that again.
That's fair. Sherwin, any reactions to new Resident Evil games happening?
I mean, I think for me, Resident Evil games are very much they're. I think the best way that I was searching for a long time to describe how it is that I am not. I've insulated myself from the occasional releases in the Resident Evil library that fall flat, and I think one of the ways that I've done that is understanding quite subconsciously that Resident Evil games are kind of like Final Fantasy games. They're not intended to follow on from each other. There was obviously a period of time there was, but not really. Every Resident Evil release, whether it be a movie, a TV series, it's another vision of Resident Evil. And I don't know necessarily follow on from that idea that one game sets up another, or anything else. Anything could be Resident Evil at this stage. Could even be it's an Animal Crossing crossover game. Who knows? At this point, it'd be kind of fun to see if they are going in a truly different direction, see what that actually looks like. Whether that is something which is really, really out there and is something completely crazy. Whether it is more of the same, but just with, I don't know, vampires and it's Castlevania-esque. It'd be really interesting to see what direction they go with in this. But I think at this stage, when someone says, hey, we've picked a whole new direction, Resident Evil's gone in so many random directions already. It's what that new direction could be is really something. Let us not forget what Dino Crisis 3 looked like and all shudder that could well be what this does.
There ain't
becomes
no
that
Dino
cursed
Crisis
monkey
3
ball.
and there never was.
Exactly. Okay, well, that's the news out of the way. Let's get into this episode's main subject, which is Resident Evil 0. And now, reading the file BOW report from Resident Evil 0, Sean Attic, who you can follow on Twitter at Sean Attic.
Research to date has shown that when the progenitor virus is administered to living organisms, violent cellular changes cause a breakdown in the system. Furthermore, no satisfactory method has been found to control the organisms for use as weapons. Clearly, greater coordination at the cellular level is essential to enable further growth. I conducted a number of experiments in an effort to find a breakthrough. This is my report. Insecta. Perhaps because these ancient animals have been genetically stable for millennia, when administered with the progenitor virus, they exhibit only explosive high energy growth and increased aggressiveness. It is extremely difficult to envision using them as BOW. Amphibia. Injecting a frog with the virus resulted in an increase in leaping power and abnormal tongue growth. However, no change in mental ability was observed. Furthermore, an abnormal appetite resulted in the test subject randomly attacking all moving objects. Usefulness for BOW is limited. Mammalia. The progenitor virus was merged with monkey's cellular DNA, resulting in increased fertility. The resulting young exhibited improved aggressiveness and some increased mental capacity. As a side effect, visual power was lost, but this was offset by an improvement in hearing ability. However, they were unsatisfactory as weapons. It does seem that no progress can be made without making humans the base organisms.
So, with Resident Evil 0, when we do a new game, I like to kind of give you a bit of the history, and we'll get into that. But I kind of want to lead with, I guess, sort of an opinion to set this up for talking about this game. Because I was thinking about it today, and I think Resident Evil 0 is a really important game. In theory and or in practice, depends on your point of view. I think, as I said in the intro, it is the last game in the series to use, and we just talked about the series changing over time, it's the last game in the series to use pre-rendered backgrounds exclusively, I believe. It's Rebecca's only main playable experience. It's the last game in the mainline games to use fixed camera angles, because after that we had Outbreak, which had kind of the dynamic Code Veronica style camera angles. In terms of the story, we've got information on the early days of the T-Virus and the Umbrella, really integral stuff. By nature of it being a prequel and answering questions we'd had for years and discussed by fans about Bravo Team, it's important. Plus, of course, it was revealed years in advance of release as a Nintendo 64 game, so there was lots riding on it when it released. Should have really been, and whether you think it is or not, really key sort of cornerstone of Resident Evil for all of those many reasons, but it's always kind of been the other game. It's the game from that era that we're doing last, 84 episodes into the podcast. People say these days if RE1 got another remake, maybe we'll have 0 as a DLC, which is really interesting as an opinion when 0 is its own game in the original timeline, if you want to call it that. When the remake got an HD remaster, it really did feel like 0 was just packed in as well. People were way more excited for a remake than 0. And of course, the original game came out the same year as the remake in 2002. I'm really excited to talk about this one because it's such an odd game that was reportedly conceptualized before the original 1996 game was even out. Started development, though, in mid-1998. There was a playable demo at TGS 2000, but Capcom hit a sort of snag with the size of the N64 cartridge and what that it could do. So the project was moved over to the GameCube, famously, and 0 was developed at Capcom Production Studio 3 with additional work by Tose. It was released in November of 2002 in America and Japan, and March 7th, 2003 in Europe. Very strong reviews upon release. I mean, its Metacritic score is 83 out of 100, but Eurogamer gave it an 8. Famitsu gave it 38 out of 40. 8 out of 10 for GameSpot. IGN gave it 8.2 out of 10, so pretty strong reviews. Of course, it got a re-release for the Wii in, I think, 2008, and the HD remaster, which I think was 2015. Does everyone remember their first introductions to Resident Evil 0? I guess, James, yours would have been playing it for the first time with Steve, or were you aware of this at all beforehand?
No, I wasn't aware of Zero before that. When Steve
Yes.
Steve teased me with this game. Sorry, I'm not asking for you. I'm just
Okay.
Steve. Steve teased this game to me like for multiple games. Like every time I talk about, it's like, well, wait till we get to zero. Wait till we get to zero. You know. So that was my first experience was playing it with Steve, and this time around for the podcast was the first time I actually played it, as well. And it is tank controls, but you get analog stick and alternate modes for it, which was nice. But I'll go over them later on. So I was very excited to play it, and I think my hype might have been too high.
Sherwood, where do you come at from Resident Evil 0 and your earliest experiences? What are your early memories of the game?
I remember pretty much when it came out, way back when. And I remember didn't even get to the point of the title screen and really utterly despising the soundtrack before I got anywhere. Like, we will absolutely talk about that. But, yeah, I remember playing it and enjoying it. It was at the time, it was very much definitely in the vein of where I wanted Resident Evil, what I wanted a Resident Evil game to look like, to feel like, to play. It's solid. I think there's a lot to like with it. I felt that at the time. Replaying it relatively recently, I felt that again. I think there's a few quality of life improvements that could be made, and I definitely think there's a whole bunch of conversations to have about both good and bad, about just about every aspect of it. But obviously the story arc and the events that happen in it is probably the obvious ones. But yeah, I think I don't want to call it flawed genius because that's too strong a term, but it's flawed good.
Yeah, I similar to you, I think I got it quite early into coming out, maybe not right away. I remember getting Remake, and I think I got Zero sometime afterwards. And I remember having a reaction of, oh, this is weird. And I'm not necessarily talking about, singing Final Fantasy Villain on the Hill, but the gameplay stuff that we're obviously going to get into as well, where it's like, oh, they've made some fairly big changes to this. And I think Resident Evil 4 was on its way, so we knew that some big changes were happening around the corner as well. But it did feel like this is an odd choice kind of experience, I remember, with Zero. And it's always been a game that I've struggled with in terms of playing it through. I finished it a few times, a handful of times in the last 22 years that it's been out, because it's so dang hard, among other things. Steve, what are your early experiences with Zero?
Odd. Like, I remember following that it was coming out, it was going to release, and then I completely blanked it until I had a friend come round, and we went to the local supermarket to get some stuff in after school. Oh my God, it's there! Quick, let's go grab it. Went home. I've never seen someone's light leave their eyes any faster because they really don't like Resident Evil games. It's a core memory, guys. Having a non-Resident Evil fan see you get excited for a Resident Evil game and then realizing your friendship is on the line for Rebecca Chambers and Billy Clowen. But no, honestly, I was kind of like, this is okay. Where are the Crimson Heads? Where are the defense items? Where are all the cool gimmicks from the last game? That was my initial response back then. That's very cool. Aesthetically and visually, we'll get into, but I was very, at the time, impressed because, Train, very lavish, very stylish. But it overpromises and underdelivers will be probably the theme of my commentary on Resident Evil 0 today, and it's not really changed much since 2003.
Interesting stuff. Okay, let's get into it. When we do these podcasts, I obviously let everyone know kind of the running order of the things we're going to hit. And with Zero, it was really hard to pick out the order of things we're going to tackle, because I think there are a lot of, we've all kind of put it out there that we're going to be picking at this game a little bit. Like, there are some issues that need to be talked about, and hopefully we can sing its praises as well. But with all the headings, it was like, oh man, this is going to be a struggle. But I think with it being a prequel, like I set up at the start, kind of a long-awaited, here's what happened 24 hours beforehand, here's the story of Rebecca getting to the mansion, all the marketing, promised answers to Bravo team. I think it's important to start with the story, which, yes, takes place the day before the original Resident Evil, sees Bravo team touching down in the Arklay Forest, getting separated, Rebecca getting on a strange train, which then springs to life. She bumps into a criminal on the loose accused of killing 30 people, Billy Cohen, and they arrive at the Umbrella training facility, where they learn sort of the history of Umbrella and the experiments, the T-virus, the leeches, all this stuff. And then, yeah, kind of unfolds from there, I guess. James, how do you feel about the story of Resident Evil 7? Resident Evil 0. You just talked about Steve talking it up for so long with it being a prequel. Is this what you're expecting from a story?
In terms of a story, because I think this might be my most positive segment.
Interesting.
There is another one, but I kind of feel like RE0 like kind of blew the lid off with what Umbrella was doing, like the shenanigans they were up to around Arklay Mountains. Like, it's like the whole area was like a rabbit warren, like, of their experiments. That's kind of the feel I got. I understand, like, there are some folks who think it's quite isolated, like, in terms of it's all the same thing. But I got the vibe that it was just different places, different locations, even though they look similar. It was all proprietary, right? And I feel like Arklay Mountains is just full of tunnels and things. Like when I played this, So I like that aspect. I like the fact that the twist with not Sephiroth turning out to be James Marcus, or rather James Marcus's body, like being taken over by the Queen Leech, like taking on his conscience, right? Taking on his traits. It was very out there, and I liked that. I like wild stuff like that. I mean, I loved Village and its story because of that stuff. So, like, I'm normally good at spotting that kind of stuff, but I didn't see that coming. Maybe because the game didn't really explain it super well, as well. But yeah, it was nice to be surprised, as along with like Wesker and Birkin being responsible for one of the founders' deaths. As well. I liked those little scenes with Birkin and Birkin and Wesker, and them kind of getting involved. You seeing their machinations. It was really cool to see that. And you got to see how effed up like Umbrella was at this point as well. Like firsthand.
Infighting and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Instead of just reading it in a note, you got to see it. And I think that's important. As well, because notes can be lied about, and they have been within the in-game universe before. Lies have been told in notes. So yeah, it was nice to see. This game has it does have a lot of good environmental storytelling. I like that you see zombies all the time, like, who are slumped over in various positions as well. They're not all in the same position, all wearing different things, and the tension is there because you know that thing's going to jump up, but then you'll find a note. And unfortunately, the notes in this game are crappadoodle dandies. They're really bad. Like, the only ones that are good are like the ones about James Marcus, the ones explaining like the mutations of the insects and the amphibians and stuff like that. I really enjoyed reading that stuff. But I think the thing that made like the original games fun, and also you felt immersed in those games, is that a lot of and I'll talk about this later in characters and other stuff, but you felt like you were within that universe because you could relate to some of these characters, and they felt like they were within universe, and they also added something to the narrative. these worker notes in the previous games. In this game, they do not. They're just whining about their job. And they don't. There's no extra information. Like it was certain moments like that lost me because I love, like, if anyone's watched our Let's Plays, Steve and I, we love reading the notes. But even you can tell even us were unenthused reading these notes because they were just boring. But taking away the notes, I really do like the story of RE0. I think it's cool. It's out there. It's just enough pseudoscience-y, like that. That I kind of love. It's just on the edge. And yeah, it might be a little bit weird and insensitive sometimes, but I do like the story overall. Good 6.5 out of 10.
I'm glad we started with a positive on it, because I'm going to be very down on the story of Resident Evil 0. And one of the reasons that you pretty much set it up, I couldn't have planned it, but the fact you were like, oh yeah, James Marcus, his body or his mind, like nobody's really very clear. And the game is very bad at explaining what the hell's going on there.
Yeah.
And I think the Queen Leech was the main villain of this game. Like, that is not James Marcus. James Marcus is dead. It's, the Leech has sort of sucked up his memories and used that to sort of reconstitute his body and take their sort of quote unquote father's vengeance, as it was. I think it's very nice and convenient that this kind of nonsense, most fans either conveniently don't bring it up when they talk about the lore of Resident Evil on purpose, or people just like, I hate it, so I don't want to talk about it, because the whole series begins because of this giant angry leech. Like, the lab accident is caused by a leech with its master's DNA in it and a vendetta, which is utterly ridiculous. Which is a shame, because I think the Marcus backstory is pretty cool up until the point that it isn't. The old man obsessed with his research, and I actually like the leech research stuff, and using that for the T virus is really interesting and very primordial, which is like a big theme of Zero. Everything feels primordial soup and ancient DNA stuff, and him being betrayed, and as you talked about, James, the Umbrella's inner politics and that kind of stuff's really cool. But then it just unfortunately goes off the rails for me. And in terms of a prequel, I don't mind that it diverges from the expected. Everyone really wanted a game that focused very much on Bravo Team and how they died. And I think if Zero told a story that was better than what we've all wondered about what happened to Bravo Team, that would be fine, but I don't think we need a canon telling of those events. It's good to wonder about it and for fans to talk about it. We talked about it literally in the last episode when we were talking about fan games and mods that make head canons a reality, and like, this is our version of how Barry got out and blah blah blah, all this stuff, whatever. Like, those are cool. Let us make our own versions. I don't think we need an official Capcom version. Sometimes the holes in the story is what make this series fun, like there not being a canonical run of the original game. But the story that Zero does set up, unfortunately, by swerving, could have been great, but I think it misses overall for me. Showen, how do you feel about Zero's story? Because it's a little bit out there.
Yeah, I'm going to land probably at the opposite end of things to you, James, because I think there is a lot of good in this game, but this is not part of that. On the one hand, I can look at Resident Evil 0 as a standalone experience, as I've described earlier, that isn't related to any of the other games. It just takes characters and events and stuff from Resident Evil and just gives a vision that is purely self-contained, and that's what Resident Evil 0 is, right? Cool. Mm. On the other hand, you look at it and go, this is a canonical entry into the series that starts effectively before Resident Evil 1 and does a whole bunch of stuff. In both senses, it is an utter failure. It's a story about Bravo Team that doesn't talk about Bravo Team. Is at a core level. It's as an elevator pitch. That's probably the best one I can say that is what it is. I think the issue for me is the presentation of the game in terms of the visuals, in terms of the sound, and everything else, and we will talk about that stuff, is spot on. In terms of the actual story, it adds a whole bunch of unnecessary gumph that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit into the existing canon of what the world is. It introduces really confusing motives and a whole bunch of stuff about just makes characters like Rebecca just not feel like they're well grounded when you actually do then find them in Resident Evil 1. It doesn't do a very good job of talking about Bravo. It introduces a whole bunch of other funky stuff that just doesn't really fit in terms of Umbrella, or takes it in a really weird and slightly strange direction. So that's if you look at it canonically. If you do look at it canonically, and if you don't look at it canonically, it's got a really funky anime story arc, which is just awful. And that's the best way to describe it. You've got not Sephiroth, which is just poor. I've got no other way to describe it. It's just awful. James, definitely, you hit the note right about the notes and everything else. I mean, they are social media-esque, people bitching about work. Sure, that fits. But the point is like, at the end of the day, it's still not, they don't add anything to the game. And I think that's the biggest thing that I can say about the story arc to what this game is. It's like, the game succeeds in spite of its awful story, of its awful presentation of that story, and the fact that the parts they've introduced just don't really do anything. The only strong thing I can say whatsoever about the story arc, and it's not even a story arc, is obviously when you load onto the game, when you first load up the game, and it gives you a bit of text at the bottom that is like a while it's loading kind of bit of text that says something or other. It's got one of the coolest, most atmospheric ones at all, which is, and I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, "Are the footsteps you hear at the edge of sound those of other survivors, or are they like ... Brilliant. Yeah. Immediately immersive, immediately makes me go, okay, wow, that's cool. Because you do see all these corpses struggle to their feet and sort of wander around and everything else. You do know the Bravo team's out there. Amazing. Really, really cool. Nope. Like, at that point, as soon as you actually start playing it and the story happens, you kind of just disconnect. I think the biggest problem that Resident Evil has had going forward as a series is, I think, one of the strengths that the first, i.e. 1 through 3 worked, is this sense of, okay, there's a suspension of belief because I'm playing a game about zombies and, very traditional kind of survival horror kind of elements to that, right? And we talked a bit about Burke in previous episodes and things, about Birkin pushing that a bit too far. It's a mutation that suddenly can end up like quadrupling, if not more, in size of this human, like, whereas he keeps on mutating. I think Zero just does jump the shark in so many ways where I just feel completely disconnected from this ever being rooted in any sort of reality, and that's where I come back to that anime story arc part.
For me, like, I appreciate, Steve, that you're being very patient, but I need to keep digging for me. Like, when you talk about how it doesn't connect, this game has a lot of that, and as someone that has been in different states of preciousness about the lore and about the geography of the world and stuff like that, as everyone, if you've listened to the show since the beginning, you've heard me ebb and flow through sort of my experience with it. There's a big point in this game where it has a huge disconnect for me, which is where Capcom testing the waters for the RE2 remake on the GameCube, where you go to the marshalling yard, which is really cool and it looks really cool, and you're like, oh my god, it's this bit, but it does exist just for, oh my god, this bit. Because then you bump into Enrico, who you last saw out in the forest, and he says, oh, everyone must be at the mansion already. We can go directly there from here. My dude, you are miles away, geographically speaking, at this point. You come back into the city. That's like, when you match this up from the locations in Resident Evil 2, this is connected to the sewer that comes from the RPD. So you've left the Arklay Mountains, theoretically trudged miles along, or at least rode a cable car miles to here. And Enrico's just happens to be here, and then you leave. And it just, and also more than that, this area shouldn't be abandoned. It shouldn't look like RE2 because it's set months before. Like, the outbreak in Arclay's only just happened. The outbreak in the city doesn't occur till, September. So none of this makes any sense. And I feel like the scenario design here just, I don't know, was either lazy or rushed out the door. Did they know that the classic games were dead and they were therefore just like, oh, whatever, we'll just stick this together now because we're going to move on to something else with Resident Evil 4. We know we're changing things up, so it doesn't really matter too much. It just asks for an incredible suspension of disbelief at this point. And as someone, if you played through all the games up to this point, it's like, none of this makes any sense. None of this makes sense.
And I think that's definitely what I was shooting at. Like, it's especially the stuff with Wesker and Birkin and the locations and everything else. It's like they've just taken like the greatest hits of Resident Evil and just shuffled them all together and come up with some fun ideas for what they think is fun ideas to put into this. And it's just a different vision of what Resident Evil is. It's a real leap of faith to say that this is in any way, shape or form canonical. Like it's the best way to describe it. It's really hard work.
I have my issues with the Birkin and the Wesker scenes, and that's more specifically how does the Queen Leech talk to them through CCTV is kind of silly, and again, suspension of disbelief. But I actually differ on. I do actually like seeing those characters on screen for the first time, and their interactions feel very sort of organic and what you would expect for them. But I can also, on the same token, believe that they were just in there as like a look at these characters, these guys, like they exist in a few scenes throughout the beginning, and they don't play really a big part in the story. Because it's more just set up. It could have been notes, but I like seeing it nonetheless. Steve, thank you for waiting. Your opinion on the story of Resident Evil Zero?
For a game that opens up with like Raccoon City, Rockfort Island, Sheena Island. You will now learn the origins, and we need to go back to the beginning. I feel like we don't learn anything other than a leech did it. And that's massively disappointing, especially because, Bravo teams right there, they could have done something interesting. Even if it's like, belay their deaths by a day. The fact that you've basically got the two groups of antagonists, you've got Wesker and Birkin, and Leech, Queen Leech, Marcus, the mimicry Marcus, Dave from accounting, whatever you want to call him. Like those two are basically having their standoff and staring through CCTV, while Rebecca and Billy are just there. Rebecca and Billy have like a dynamic on the train, which is a bit standoffish until she's saved from the first leech, and then they're pretty much just, I'll go alone. Let's split up. Come over here. Yeah. That's pretty much the majority of their stuff, other than one brief interval where Rebecca basically goes, Billy, I know you may have killed some people, but did you really kill some people? I won't judge you. It's hard to try and like this story. Like, the most interesting parts to me are the fact that the Ecliptic Express may have not been going to or was derailed towards the facility, but clearly Umbrella staff on the train, they know about it. There's an investigation going on at the facility at the time before the Queen Leech, throws a spanner in the works. The big background stuff, the reason why Wesker and Birkin are even on the CCTV in the first place. And that's it. Like, otherwise, it's just, the world will burn, an inferno of hate. Great plan, James.
That's two.
I kind of really preferred it when the accident at the Arclay lab was in fact an accident and not some kind of scheming sabotage thing. The origin of the T-virus being made by leeches and James Marcus's downfall and being backstabbed by Umbrella, while interesting, could have been completely cauterized off entirely, and I feel like we wouldn't have lost all that much. Before this, it was just Birkin made it. He's a bit of a bell. There are things in Zero I do like. I want to attest that there are things we'll get into later, but the story itself, it's not very good. And, the only other STARS members who utter any lines are Enrico, who, fair play to the VA, he's channeling RE1 VA, RE1 Rico pretty hard. And finally we see Edward Dewey, and he seems like a very cranky sort, then he's dead. Cheers.
Indeed. Okay, cool. Well, I think, it's we've ripped the story a new one, but
where is the big payoff to all these things that have happened? Where is the big origin? Prequels are hard to land in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
I can count on one hand the amount of prequels I think have actually landed. I think that's just Yakuza 0 at this point. Not going there. I'm gonna move on.
I was just going to say quickly, Resident Evil 0 on N64 is one of these sort of Resident Evil projects that I will be endlessly curious about. And I really do wonder what the scenario for that was compared to the 2002 release. And I'm not saying that to continue to bag on the story. Maybe it was always this way or whatever. It's such a stretch of time between... We're conceptualizing this before the original game's out. We're developing this in mid-1998 to it comes out in 2002. That's at least 4 years to at least have a rough structure of what the story was. I'd be so curious to see how that transformed over time, to see if it was handled by different people across the time, and that's why it ended up in the state that it was, or influenced by other outside aspects. Just really curious about what the original idea for the prequel was compared to the final version. And maybe it is exactly the same. Maybe this is in their plans all along, but can't help but be very curious about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that point. That's always, yeah. I remember seeing the shots of like what that looked like, and it's just cool. Makes me all warm and fuzzy because it remembers the good old days of these games. Yeah, it's just a really. I think you said it best, Steve, in terms of where's the payoffs, for this story arc. Where are all the various different. There's just so much promise, and I think it is possible to make a prequel game or a game that works in this that works in relation to what this is. And the one I'm going to go for, which is slightly unorthodox, but I don't know if anyone remembers that. Well, people will. The original Warriors game that came out, I think it was Rockstar,
Mm-hmm.
where it literally took the events of the movie and then just put a little bit of a run up to it, but also weaved in and out between the scenes. So kind of you have a scene from the movie, and here's what the other guys were doing, turning up to that scene that you didn't see in the movie for whatever reason. There's so much we could have done with Bravo Team, where it's like, this is how Richard gets here. This is that bit where this is what happens to Forrest. This is that bit where, this is how Rebecca ends up here, whatever else. This is where Enrico's gone and how he discovered about bits and pieces and that sort of stuff. I don't know whether you do it as kind of like zapping between lots of different characters, lots of small little story chunks, whatever else, right? There's loads of ways you can envision this and actually make it work as a Resident Evil, as a game that leans into Resident Evil 1. And instead of that, it was just, nope, we're going to do a whole new story arc, and we have zero level of care for whether that actually ties into the stuff that happened before. We're almost retconning it as we go. And the new ideas are bad. They're just bad.
Let's move on to a different heading. I think this one, I think the story is probably the thing that we're going to rip on the most. I may be wrong. Let's talk about the locations and the atmosphere of the game. I think that's a big thing for Zero. For me, it's a big thing that, generally speaking, it does quite well. Just to set us up and let everyone else go. Everyone remembers the train. People will talk about Resident Evil Zero as being the Resident Evil on the train because it's the best and most interesting bit of it. Even if I don't think it's as amazing as everyone says it is, it's always nice to replay it. It's a really interesting location because of obviously the shape of it, size of it, the weaving back and forth over sort of on top of yourself a little bit. And as an introduction to Zero's mechanics with the dumbwaiter and the separation of the boss fight, I think it's a nice little chunk of the game. It's really funny that it's not that big in terms of the sort of full pacing of Zero. It's sort of like a little bit of a prologue before you get to the first major location, as it were. So everyone calls it, the Resident Evil on the train, but the train really is only the first sort of 40 minutes or whatever. But the train's obviously great, but yeah, let's talk about locations and atmosphere. Steve, how do you feel about this?
Okay, so I'm gonna jump away from the train because most people will say how they love it and all the details on it, and this recent playthrough in preparation for the podcast, like, okay, yeah, all right, fair enough. A little clip about the train. It looks like a mobile piece of the Spencer Mansion. I love the aesthetic of the place. Hauntingly creepy. Right, moving on. I'll leave that to everyone else. Training facility. Like, I actually really appreciate in this particular case, while obviously it's very enclosed, would be very, very compressed. I can almost believe it almost as an actual place. Like, there's places to study, places to sleep, places to rest. I think the only thing the place is really lacking is a decent sized mess hall, like a dinner room table and a kitchen. But I
know the joke is obvious, but it has a bathroom, which is shocking for Resident Evil.
It actually has sizable toilets for a public location. Aesthetically, on par, if not exceeding, the original Resident Evil's remake. It's of the same quality, distinct environments. Like, I can picture big mosaic halls. If someone said this used to be an art gallery, I'd 100% believe it over RE2's RPD. Like, this is more of an art gallery, but also a place of learning. And I love that. Then you've got nonsensical stuff like a observational tower that is also an elevator. The magical elevator that goes everywhere, up and down, back into Raccoon City and back and forth. The areas that are revisited from Resident Evil 2 look fantastic, but make no sense because why are they run down? Are we meant to believe that Capcom are now saying that Umbrella have many a lab that looks like the RE2 lab? I'm not going there. None of this shed 4 business. We all know the debates. If you're long enough in the fandom, no, there are not multiple labs that look like Birkin's lab. I'm on that camp. I still don't know what the name of the last facility is. The big end-all one.
The water treatment facility.
The water treatment facility.
I believe so.
It feels like it's a cobbled-together mess. of like bits and pieces of a dead factory that doesn't exist.
Yeah, does feel like the Dead Factory.
Yeah, and then here's a random lab room with giant locusts in it. Aesthetically, it looks fantastic, especially for a GameCube title at the time, right? But it feels a bit meh. Compared to the training facility, the water treatment plant is kind of dire. But yeah, as actual places, more believable than most Resident Evil titles at the time.
Yeah, the Resident Evil wiki, shout out to those guys, have as the Arclay treatment plant, but whether or not, to call it what you like, they also call it as being attached to Nest, which I vehemently will stand by and say that it's got nothing to do with Nest, but James, how do you feel about the locations and the atmosphere of Zero? I think the atmosphere in this game is one of its strongest suits, I have to say.
The train at the start and the mansion or the not mansion is top tier in terms of area locations. Like when there are certain locations when you think about them, you think about a game and they pop out. Unfortunately, I think that they pop out so much because the second half of this game loses its way for me. Like you're just every room feels grey, brown, looks very similar. Like it's why I've said this before, and I think I've said it a few times, but it's why this game is always fuzzy in my memory, because the butt end of this game just feels very samey. But I do want to like give credit where it's due. Like everywhere in this game, when atmosphere comes into play, it's always on point. Like the way they use silence is awesome. As well, and there's sometimes like creepy background noises as well that give me chills. Like I was always tense playing the game. There's this like one scene that also, I think the only scene that really jumps out at me other than the Queen Leech scene, and it's near the end, and again, it goes into environmental storytelling here, but as well. But there's a pile of bones and skeletons in one of the water rooms. They're all bloody, still splattered. We've not seen anything like that, not in my memory anyway. But it was gross and gruesome, and you learnt that basically they're just been throwing bodies down here of dead experiments, like people who were failed experiments. Yeah, I don't know why, but the heartbeat boom boom that comes on when you switch characters always made me nervous. Like it just like
it's a moment of insecurity, isn't it, between characters? Like if you were attacked at this moment.
Yeah, it was. So it got to a point where I stopped doing the live transitions between characters nice. And I just started doing it in the menu instead. So there's a lot done here with the locations and the atmosphere with the game. It is genius stuff. It's probably my favorite. I think probably my favorite part of the game, to be honest.
Yeah, you absolutely hit the nail on the head for me. I literally have in my notes the problem with the locations in this game is that every single one of them is brown, grey and black, which is a shame. It just kind of becomes a malaise. The game becomes a bit hazy because of it. I think there are lots of memorable rooms, but in my brain, I can't necessarily connect some of the locations together, especially the late game. Definitely becomes a little bit forgettable, unfortunately.
Just becomes
because
amorphous.
Style of the time. Yeah, absolutely. And which is a shame because I think individually the locations and the pre-rendered backgrounds and stuff look really good. We'll talk about visuals later, but I think the actual locations themselves look really good. The other thing is I found that there was, on this playthrough, lots of rooms that are kind of needless. Like you could argue that they add character to the game and flesh out the location a little bit more and make it realistic, and that's fine. There's character and there's function though, and there were several rooms that were just like, this is a room that has a first aid spray in it, and that's it. Like no key items, nothing to actually interact with, that kind of thing. I was like, it's a little odd. And also I thought the pacing was kind of weird. The train does feel short on repeat playthroughs. The training facility sort of stops as soon as it feels like it's about to open up a new wing, and kind of you get familiarized with it in a classic Resident Evil way, and then suddenly there's a whole new area bolted on. But because of the way that Zero is, it just feels like you leave it completely, and obviously you come back via the magic elevator later, but you've already done it all. You're literally just coming out, to pick your magnum rounds up or whatever. I think the lab is the highlight for me from a design perspective. I think it looks really cool. It's really unique, especially compared to other labs in the series. And I really like the gameplay of that section where it is mostly the characters being split up and you having to vary items from one side to the other. Again, we'll get to that. And then, there's the water treatment facility at the end, which is fine. It's incredibly forgettable. It feels weird to have a lab after a lab in a Resident Evil game. But it's mostly, unfortunately, meh. And to your point, James, about, it feeling like a location where they're dumping bodies and experiments, if it wasn't for the fact that you first fight the proto-tyrant, near Birkin's lab or whatever, it kind of showing up here is a nice sort of thematic thing of, this is where they dumped the failed tyrant. That obviously isn't necessarily the case because you fight it somewhere else first. I wonder if that was going to be the plan and then they bolted in the RE2 stuff, like I said earlier. Well, I guess we'll never know. Sherwin, what do you think of the locations and the atmosphere of Zero?
Canonically, they're just a failure. Assuming that part away, though, I love the atmosphere of this game. I think this game is creepy, it is foreboding, it is lonely. I actually really enjoy the fact that everything sort of blurs into that dirge, into that horrible sepia tone kind of sludge, because that's just perfect for what this game, for what a Resident Evil game should feel like. I don't play it because I want it to be like Disneyland. I play it because I want to be scared, because I want to be afraid, and because everything should look like it's covered in the funk of 40,000 years. Like, it's just what it is. Like, I want this to feel like I am creeping around dead things, and that's not good. I don't want to be here. I definitely feel that. I mean, the levels are too short. I think you definitely nailed it when you said the training facility feels like you're about to open up a new area and, right, I'm leaving then. Okay, fair enough. The train actually, weirdly, I'm probably the exception to this. I get why the train is creepy. I get why the train works. For me, the train is possibly, is probably one of the slightly more forgettable areas of the game, which is interesting because I find it just blurs into, it's a train. I'm going up and down carriages and there's a couple of events that happen there, but ultimately, it just feels like why am I on this train? I just want to be off it and exploring a location and going about it and doing other bits and pieces. But I think the rest of them are all deployed fairly well. I mean, the standard disclaimer is I think it could definitely benefit. Like, I love the aim. I love some of the pointless rooms where you go in, there's nothing actually in here. I didn't need to go in this place. Cool. That's what it should be. I like the sense of wandering around and finding all the weird and wacky locations that you can inside the train facility and other places. The part that I'm not so strong on is I think it definitely could benefit from going, we're grounded in one place. Very Resident Evil. We're grounded in one place. That's the main area you explore. We branch off to these smaller areas rather than keep on moving, because the whole feel of what the game is, and we'll talk about that with the the zapping system, the item management works, feels like you want to be grounded in somewhere. Like, every mechanic this game has pulls away from that idea of going forward and exploring and going out. And unfortunately, that simple deployment of I'm jumping from location to location really goes away. Really goes away from that.
That's completely fair, actually. Completely agree.
And now, reading the file, Assistant Director's Diary from Resident Evil 0, Donnie Draco, who you can find on Casting Call Club as Donnie Draco.
September 2nd. A useless bunch of trainees as always. Where does headquarters find these idiots? We did get a couple of decent ones though, so I can't complain, I guess. William and Albert? They might have a future. September 25th. Scholar Will, Practical Al. They really are opposites. And they're always competitive in everything they do. There's something ruthless and cruel about them both. October 7th. Got a sudden call from the director. It was to tell me to encourage a rivalry between those two. It's the first time since this training facility was built that Director Marcus has ever shown any interest in anything other than his own research. Well, whatever. Orders are orders. And I am going to have them tearing at each other's throats.
Okay, let's talk about the characters then. As I said, this is the only, primary playable Rebecca. You get a little bit in RE1, but as a main protagonist, this is Rebecca's starring role, alongside sharing it sort of full duty with Billy Cohen, one of the many one-off protagonists in the series. But as we've mentioned, there's also the Queen Leech, Wesker and Birkin, a little bit of Edward, a little bit of Enrico. How do we feel about the characters in Resident Evil Zero? James, let's start with you.
Thank you for starting with me, because
You're
I'm
welcome.
gonna start with a high note that everybody's gonna disagree with. Big surprise.
Here we go.
No, I take this with a pinch of salt. It's just little things I like. It's not the whole thing I like, but I do like Billy's backstory.
Sure.
And I've mentioned this in another podcast. I think it was Degeneration, but it was the opposite of what I wanted. It's what I want to see more in Resident Evil. Not like the character Billy, like it's these small messed up incidents that hint at bigger problems, which is why I like Resident Evil, like little stories. It feels human. Like recent entries and movies, they've tried to over-explain Big Corpo being responsible, and we knew that already. And when you do that, like the Resident Evil's, like, they're great stories of the individuals, the people on the ground. Like, once you remove the human element, like, and you say, big corporation comes in, blah blah blah, it loses the horror. Like, I that's why I like his story, because even though at some points in the game it doesn't make sense, like, you get given this story of a man who was framed by a big corporation, and that's the power they have over him. And that it's good, I like that. I like it when, like, it's a real human story, because I don't know about everybody else, but when you make a story about just a big corporation, a big organization doing this, I start to disconnect, because it's like, well, now it's not a horror game, it's just a politics game. I mean that in, like, the most truest extent. And I know folks weren't happy with Rebecca, like her not coming back, not explaining anything. I understand that, and I get it. It's valid. But with my bias partly put aside, I want you to try and put yourself in her shoes for a second. And this is how I've kind of got around to understanding it, and how I think maybe a remake should try and kind of approach this. She's been through a hell of a lot for 24 hours straight. She's just found out the company that funds the folks she works for are corrupt to the worst degree. I think I'd probably keep my mouth shut too around other employees in the same department.
Interesting point. Yeah.
So I know that isn't explained in the game, but if they want to explain that in a remake, I would be completely fine with it.
I would love, sorry to jump in, but I would love some kind, if they were to do a remake, going way sidebar here, some kind of interaction maybe between her and Wesker that, like, really pounds home the idea that, like, they've been betrayed and she's not sure who to trust.
Yeah.
Because then you're right, then that unfolds to other people, and she's like, I'm hanging out with these people, but I don't know who's up on the up and up, who's on the take. So it's actually a very good point. I've not heard that perspective before. I like it.
Yeah, I want to make, because I understand it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's completely valid, and I agree. But the game is there, and it's part of the core mainline games. And I think if they want to build it into something where it does make sense, they should try to link those things. Like, and yeah, that gets me past the gate. Like, but it would be nice to have it in a visual form, in an interactive form, in a video game, right? So doesn't feel so just disjointed, because I think that's everybody's, like, main complaint with this game. It's how disjointed everything feels,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, actually, I can kind of agree with you on Billy. I think his backstory is good for the reasons that you've said. I think Resident Evil really does paint an illuminating picture of the US government in that sort of story, but they've never actually faced it head on. Almost like they're afraid to actually do too much about it. But there's hints here and there, and they talk about the corruption of the government in various ways. You know, buying stuff from Umbrella and the cover up and all that, and just different things entirely that aren't related to bioterrorism, just regular terrorism and militaristic efforts. And yeah, like little stories like that tie characters to the world without tying them directly to it's such and such a sibling, or it's such and such, or they're associated with this organization. I like his backstory. I think he's boring though. Yeah, he's just kind of the main character. He makes an awkward pass at Rebecca, and then we move on, and he just becomes a bit of a, you know, he's fine. He's dull, but he's fine. And for me, I thought, you know, Rebecca, issues that you've quite rightfully pointed out aside, I think she's very likable here. That's the main thing for me. I think her care for Billy comes across nicely. I'd like that there's no real big romantic overtones to it. It's just two people trying to get out. There isn't a lot of character growth for anyone, but she comes out of this being fairly likable, and I don't think Billy is dislikable.
He's like very neutral.
He's just kind of. If anything, maybe I would be more interested if there was something there to hate. But otherwise, he's just kind of, you know, it's fine. Showen, how did you get on with Rebecca, Billy, and the cast of Zero?
I mean, you said like it's a stage show. It's kind of fun. Yeah, no, I mean, again, we'll suspend the part where their characters in a continued story arc of what Resident Evil is. I think the representation of the characters is fine for the most part. Forrest doesn't say much. It's pretty good. It's pretty spot on. Like, yeah, they kind of give Edward a role in this, which, you know, considering that that's a character that no one had any idea who that even was at the time, is pretty good. Rebecca does feel appropriately appropriate parts innocent, appropriate parts this is my first mission, really don't really know what I'm doing and trying to get by. Enrico tells you to keep your guard up multiple times, which is good. It's the marker stuff I'm not even going to cover because it's just not good. But I think Billy is the one for me that is a missed opportunity. It's such a bland. I definitely agree with where you're coming from, James, in the sense that it's a good opportunity to weave more human interaction into this. And that's exactly what these games should have, and that what makes us care about these characters and so on. The problem for me is that Billy is just such a blank slate. It's bad writing. He doesn't come across as a believable human being in this situation. This is someone who is, you know, hard done by the military, / apparently could or could not be a killer, / you know, is kind of looking at a life in prison or whatever else, and somehow is just, I'm free. Actually, I'm going to kind of help people. Like, there's a degree, and the only way I'm ever going to rebel at all is with a bit of sarcasm here and there. Like, it's you. Ultimately, I am surrounded by a massive forest. I'm just going to run off into the forest. I have a gun. I'll probably be okay. I'll be a little bit like Stallone's Rambo. Like, I'll just go out there and make a fight camp or something. Like, yeah, when you're on the run anyway, why are you wandering around with a police officer, which you know can't exactly end well because she's going to arrest you at the end if that actually happens? Wandering around a monster-infested mansion / training facility / train / whatever you are. It's that character for me is what is part of another failing of what this game is. It introduces a new character into the series, but they are seemingly just there as a vehicle to demonstrate that Rebecca is a bit clueless in some ways, and that I'm not so good with. That's otherwise, fair. the rest is middle ground. It's okay. Nothing ever does anything exceptional. None of them do anything exceptional, but they're all perfectly adequate representations of who this should be.
Steve, where do you land with the characters in Zero?
Oh, God. Get the swear jar ready. I'm sure I'll slip up. Like, okay, so the Queen Leech is perhaps the most, if not the worst villain in the Resident Evil franchise. Bar none. Like, I understand it's not really a person. It's more of a vengeance-driven hive mind of leeches that thinks it's a person. But my plan is to destroy the world. Mwaha! It's just shit. It's just pure liquid, unadulterated shit. sidebarring back into the other characters, though, I feel like Wesker and Birkin's relationship isn't really touched on very well, other than apparently Birkin went to the RE1 school of acting, whereas Wesker's kind of cold and aloof, and I kind of like Richard Waugh's subdued performance of him, to be honest. I thought this version of Wesker, while we don't see much of him as a quiet, scheming git, was all right, you know. Enrico, again, got that big RE1 energy in his vocal performance. Otherwise, doesn't really do much except I represent the rest of Bravo team and I'll be gone in 5 seconds. Cheers. Rebecca, I like Rebecca in this. Don't get me wrong, really. I want to emphasize that Riva De Paula's performance as Rebecca, I really enjoy as a character. I think they're cool. But that's because it's not really Rebecca Chambers. It's more, let's take some parts of Jill Valentine, some parts of early Claire Redfield and meld them together. At no point do I see Rebecca Chambers medic. I see out of the depth soldier girl who's occasionally a teenager. Yeah? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Like, I don't see her, like, when she's on the train, she's surrounded by bodies. Her first response should be to check if anyone's alive. I know they're going to try and bite her. We know how that goes, but she's a medic. Like,
Yeah, and she doesn't know that.
you know, the first time we see her in every, like, in the movies is, like, doing sciencey stuff or doing, you know, medical stuff. The first time we see her in the game is either getting pepper sprayed in the face or she's over a body of a colleague. Like, she's not doing anything to her role, if that makes any sense. And that frustrates me because that's not Rebecca Chambers. That's Claire or Jill. I really do like Rebecca in this, but she's not Rebecca. As for Billy, I feel like they missed a trick. Like, generic dude aside, the backstory is interesting. I feel like they could have played up more into it if, like, for example, obviously we're leaning into more what we know in the future, but if the town had been, say, like, you know, the Endipire, I don't know how you pronounce it, the village in Africa that basically gets glassed by Umbrella to use for that. If it had been an American operation to wipe that town out so Umbrella could go in, that would have made the plot a lot more interesting. Like, obviously, would have been hooks for future games. But instead, it's just, I am a soldier who was basically made a scapegoat for another soldier's mistake, and now I'm going to be executed. I'm also in this plot for some reason. Like, it's a shame, because Billy and Rebecca have good chemistry for what they are, and it's nice that they don't do the romance thing, like has been said, but generally speaking, it's just okay. Queen Leech could die in a fire, though, and I'm glad it did.
Okay, cool. Well, appropriately then, we'll move on from characters to the other side of the fence. Let's talk about monsters. Let's talk about BOWs. Let's talk about nasties. Sherwin, what's your opinion on Zero's roster of enemies?
So, I mean, zombies are good, obviously. Fairly safe statement. I actually really, for the most part, I'm actually pretty good. I'm not so good with some of the bosses. And when I say some of the bosses, I mean anything that isn't a proto-tyrant. So,
yeah.
Why we feel like we had to just really go to the zoo with this game and just have, let's have a giant mutant scorpion. Let's have a giant centipede or whatever that creature is. Locust, insert appropriate bug here. This is a giant bat and so forth. Why we felt the need to do that stuff was a bit odd to me. Like, they didn't make sense when I got there in the game. They didn't really make any sense afterwards. There wasn't anything that really made me go, okay, this is literally they are just enemies or bosses for bosses' sakes. Like, there's so much more interesting stuff you could have done. There's so many more stories you could tell with a decent boss. Like, the Proto-Tyrant doesn't get any indication whatsoever of why it's in this game, what it is, in other than its name, and yet somehow it still manages to convey so much story. And that's by sheer nature of the design of the thing. Having an enemy where, bearing in mind this is the game series that gave us Lisa Trevor, or gave us any number of different tragedies when it comes to why a boss turns up. It's there's so much potential that is just unused in this game because it's like, here's a giant scorpion. Okay, cool. But outside of that, like, the enemies feel fairly solid. There is a special place in my heart of loathing and hatred for the Leech enemies.
Yeah.
They are, I mean, mechanically, cool. They do exactly what they're, no issues with them whatsoever there. But they are absolutely a very good indication of of the awful decline of Resident Evil games into Mr. Wibbly Wobbly Man enemies versus something that actually feels cohesive. The best way I've got to describe the leeches, is that actually the proper name? The leeches, just leech men?
Mimicry Marcus is what they're called.
Fair enough, one of those then.
Yeah.
So is when they re-released the Transformers movie and they went from very clearly designed characters where you could look at it, understand what you're looking at and get it, to a mess of random shapes that look like a bunch of paper clips cut together and then sort of just jumbled together to make a car. It's the same thing there. It just doesn't feel cohesive. It just feels messy, and I think that's a problem. Outside of that, I really like a lot of what this game is doing. I love the Eliminators. I'm very much alone in this, but I think they're excellent. I mean, you want an infuriating enemy. It's perfect. And I very much like and I like what they did with the zombies as well. I think James touched on this earlier as well in terms of the difference of designs and the way they're all slumped over in different ways and shapes and form and everything else. There's storytelling in the enemy design, which is brilliant. It's just not there at all for the bosses.
Yeah, actually, that was my first note. I really like the sort of zombie skins, if you want to call it that, in this game. There's a lot of variety to them, especially compared to Remake. After playing Resident Evil, the board game, I realised that game is really rather slim in terms of its zombie sort of designs, whereas Zero has a lot of different stuff and occasionally some interesting colour palettes, and you've got guys in hard hats and all kinds of stuff. So I really like the zombie designs. But I will get into my further opinions beyond that. Sherwin, you said about Mr. Wibbly Wobbly Men. Steve, you put out a tweet the other day saying, I think, positive things about this in Resident Evil. So I'm going to come to you next. How do you feel about the BOWs in Zero and also Mimicry Marcus in particular?
Oh, God. Right. The concept I love because it's the idea of weapons testing. They're going from, small creatures to bigger creatures. You've got, obviously, your insects and then your apes, the Eliminators. I'm actually on Team Eliminators are pretty cool, by the way. Frustrating, but as a step up from the dogs, they're like a nice middle threat. I keep flip-flopping over the Mimic Marcus, to be honest with you. I like the idea of them. I wish they were a bit more dynamic in that, like, a zombie that you think is a zombie actually breaks apart in his leeches, as opposed to, here's this green man who becomes a wibbly massive problems, and you can just walk past him and leave. And then he's never a problem ever again. They're not, to say they are intimidating if you try and fight, they are remarkably easy to just leave, which is a strange thing for the signature enemy of the game, and they get their own theme and everything else. If they were made a bit more dynamic, like, for example, you have a horde of zombies in a room, one of them's a leech, and that becomes a problem then. A bit more interesting than a green man you just don't shoot and walk past. Bosses. I am on team most of the bosses suck. Like, the prototype tyrant T001 I love. I wish there was actually lore about it other than here is this discarded battered tyrant. It looks more interesting than the last time we'd seen at the time, last new tyrant. We saw the remakes tyrant, obviously, but like the CVX one, for example, which is just a ham-fisted one. Instead we get a busted, broken, almost zombified tyrant. It's jerky, just kind of dies. And that's it. Obviously, we know what happens. It fights Wesker and Umbrella Chronicles, but it still then just kind of dies. Doesn't take the classic rocket launcher finish, which is a shame. And can someone describe to me the shape of the Queen Leech?
No.
That's right.
It's a meat tent, Steve.
It's an upset meat tent. It's just garbage. Like bin bags strapped together. What? For a series known for its inventive designs, we've got giant bug monsters and a blob. And I'm not even going to get started on the f***ing bat. Like, Jesus. I understand the concept of, viral experimentation and iterative stuff. We even get hunters in there, thank God. But why? This is the end game, which is just a misshapen blob beast. Nemesis looked like a misshapen blob beast at the end of Resident Evil 3 Classic. But then it looked like it's got tentacles, it's got a weird brain on it, it's spitting out of an orifice. This is just a blob. It's got red bits, and the rest of it's a grey blob. It is the blandest thing in Resident Evil history. Again, the Queen Leech.
Yeah. The blobbiest of all the blobs we've had, that's for sure.
Yeah. Scorpion was all right, I suppose. You could just knife it to death. Did you know that? It's really easy.
Mm-hmm. I will get into the bat then. The bat is probably the worst boss in Resident Evil history, or it's right up there. I think the actual legitimate strategy is to stun lock it which is absolutely dumb. Like, that's basically the only way that you can fight it, because it being in the air, you being on the ground, that makes it tough enough, and then it spawns all these little bats as well that get in your way, so you can't even necessarily use heavy weaponry all that well, because you could potentially be wasting flame grenades on little bats instead. But basically, your best thing is just to root yourself at the end of the room and hit it as soon as it gets close enough, and hope that it gets stunned enough for you to just unload enough until it's dead. It's a crap boss. It's boring. It's really unexplained, I think, as well. More than just backstory to some of these bosses, which we might have got in other games. I don't think there's any other mammal in the series that gets this big. Like, they don't. We talked about files earlier. Like, one of the best ones is the BOW report, where they take you through what happens to each sort of different kind of animal when infected with the T virus. And we have prior examples of that if you've gone through the games before and you're like, oh, that does work out, and you're getting more through this game. But the bat just becomes abnormally massive, and all the rest of them normal, one giant one. It's bizarre. But yeah, I'll say the rest of mine until last. James, how do you feel about the BOWs in this game?
So visually and what they did, how they look fantastic. I really love inset BOWs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like it. It's a nice change of pace. Like, they looked really horrific to look at. But the boss fight mechanics were awful. They were lackluster. They felt they hadn't been tested at all. Yeah. Like, I felt like there was no QA here. Like, the only one that felt like it was risky but fair was the infected tyrant, Proto, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing to mention is there's barely any bosses in this game, so it's kind of inexcusable for these to be bad.
Fair.
You know, because it's like, what did you spend your time on? You know, because Steve, I remember watching Steve do it, and then I did it recently, just standing in the corner of the room to let the giant centipede just run around as it grabs.
I was going to say about that, yeah.
You know, the bat was funny for me. I went in there, I missed a bunch of shots with Rebecca. I went out because she was starting to hold her hip. Billy had moved off his station without me saying, so I couldn't go back in there, so I had to move Rec onto there. He went in, shot it. I just shot a shotgun shell into the air. Didn't even know, and it died.
Nice.
I didn't feel good. I should have felt good.
Yeah.
I didn't feel good because it was a dumb boss. Keep spawning bats, infinitely spawning ads in a Resident Evil game. This is an MMO. Come on. Like, it was awful. And yeah, the centipede was cool. It looked cool. I like those centipedes. I watch videos about them all the time, but the boss was crap. I liked the giant scorpion, and Steve told me you could just wreck it with a knife, right? But I liked the fact, like, when you first play, you see a giant scorpion, you're in this isolated kind of corridor with because you're on the train. That's terrifying, and it's constantly coming at you. Like, that terrified me. Like, but yeah, I think out of all of them, other than the Proto-Tyrant, I think the giant scorpion is my favorite. Purely from my first experience with it. Yeah, so that, I mean, when it comes to the bosses, I wanted to talk about the hunters.
Sure.
Because, like, I mean, technically they're not back, but they're deadlier. They're deadly as F. Like, probably the last time I felt genuinely scared of them, like, of hunters, was 3-make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then I played this game, and I felt scared again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think they really did well, the hunters. Like, I know that their whole thing is stun locking, and also I'm Team Eliminator as well. I quite like that little creature, that little monkey boy. Yeah, I like him. And then I tell you one unsung hero, and it's crazy because, like, when you look at these things, they look so cool for the limited amount of time you see them, and it's the lurkers. They have like unique attacks. Like, it sucks that we don't see more of them. Like, but they put work into those things, like, in terms of how they look visually. Yeah, so I mean, those are my highlights and my lowlights when it comes to BOWs, anyway.
There's a lot of stuff for me to get into. When it comes to Eliminators, since you've all said your Team Eliminator, I'm undecided. Like, I like them as a design. I like the concept of them. they are real aren't they? Like the stun lock, the damage they can do to you in this game is outrageous. But I don't hate them entirely for that, to be quite honest. Well, you talked about the lurkers. I think there's literally 2, 3 rooms that they can show up in.
2, yeah. 2 is what I could count.
They are. I think they're. I love the idea of a frog BOW. I mean, when we talk about teams, it's Team Frog Boy, right? But so this is kind of the dopey cousin of the Hunter Gamma, because they're kind of boring, unfortunately. Like they could have done so much more with them. I got killed one, I think, by one for the first time ever in this playthrough, because I, decided to run back the way I came instead of the way past it, and it grabbed me with its tongue, and I couldn't get out in time, so I got eaten whole, which was kind of fun. But you don't really get an opportunity to experience that in a sense because there's so few of them. Also, the zombie dogs I think were mentioned as sort of. I think Steve, you said the Eliminators as a dog replacement. It's a great shout, like that mid enemy. The dogs are in this game. They're literally in 2 rooms in the train, which I guess makes sense because they need to be there for, again, the connective lore, which is the one time they do get it right. The fact that there would probably be dogs out there since you're out in the forest. But then they don't show up beyond that, which is fine. I just thought it was an interesting thing. You guys have all missed one BOW completely. I'm surprised it didn't come up, which is the Plague Crawler, which is the cockroach thing. They're kind of like cockroaches. They look
like a mixture between a roach and a cave crawler.
Yeah, right. They're not totally cockroachy, but they're in that kind of area. I think as a design, they look awesome. There's a shot of them when they come out of the glass tubes in the water treatment facility, which was really cool looking. They're cool. Fairly scary, fairly creepy stuff, and they kind of are a good part of Zero's, what I said earlier, primordial soup of insects and sort of ancient DNA, and I kind of get the perspective that they're coming from there with the scorpion and the centipede. I see why it filters into that, but it is kind of dull. All the enemies are kind of brown and boring, and the fights with the bosses, you're all absolutely right. You can easily just cheese everything except the Proto-Tyrant. The scorpion with a knife, the centurion, you can stand at the top of the stairs. The bat, I mean, cheesing it is the right way to fight it, but if you can do that, then well done. The Proto-Tyrant's great. I massively agree there. His model, his animations in particular are fantastic. The way that he jerks around, like his spine doesn't even fit into his body anymore, is disgusting. It's awesome. I love it. It's a mixed bag for me. There's some stuff in here that I do sort of look back on fondly, but there's also stuff that I feel like they could have done so much better with, but there we go. Speaking of doing so much better, that nicely brings us to the gameplay. There are a bunch of things to get into here. When you talk about Zero and you bring it up to people, they always have the certain caveats that I'm sure we're all going to start digging into. But let's talk about, the final classic-style Resident Evil. How do you feel about how it stacks up against the rest of them? Steve, what's your thoughts on how Zero plays?
12 item slots sounds amazing.
It sounds amazing.
But somehow it's awful.
Is it 12?
Yeah, 6 each.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you 6 for Rebecca, 6 for Billy, it's...
Yeah, fair enough.
But it's dreadful. The ability to control both characters with an analog stick is nice in the modern version. I can't remember if the yellow stick on the GameCube pad could control player 2, so to speak, but... The ability to swap between both of them reminds me of... I want to say, is it Martian Gothic? There's an old, similar Resident Evil clone of the before times where you can swap characters. And it's got a similar kind of energy to that, is what my brain keeps going to. Otherwise, you'd think it'd be fun to be able to control 2 characters at once, but you just park one somewhere safe and you do the questing until you need the other character for a particular reason. So it's redundant. Item box stuff aside, I've come up with a golden rule to make it so it's bearable, at least for me, and that is only grab handgun ammo when you need it. Don't hoard it. Don't hoard it. Just grab healing items on the way, and it works wonders. Because otherwise, you're just forever bidding and bobbing, carrying items, and just drop the hook shot whenever in the main hall until you need it. I understand it's a nightmare frustration to the point where there are now mods for an item box. The signature feature of this game being dropping items and no item box needed was so badly implemented that people have modded it back in. That says it all, really. combat with the enemies and stuff is fundamentally the same as it was. We've lost all of the gimmicks from Resident Evil Remake. No defense items, no having to worry about bodies coming back, and it's lesser for it. I feel like if there was ever a time, I know the minutiae is it's a different virus or whatever, even though it's the same thing causing the outbreak and that a leech did it. But it's a missed trick, is all I'm saying. It feels like a ball was dropped. And don't get me started on having 2 shotguns and so many different weapons and so much ammo you cannot carry. It's a lot to manage. That being said, the combat itself is as functional as it ever was. So if you enjoyed the fixed camera angle Resident Evils, such as I do, generally speaking, you'll have an okay time in move, shoot, move and shoot again.
Yeah, I mean, I said early into this that it's a game that I've not finished that many times, and I start it every now and then and don't get very far. So actually going through it in its entirety this time was quite nice. It was quite refreshing to go back, and play a game of a style that I was very familiar with, but a game that I hadn't touched in a while. I don't think I played this game at least since before we started First Aid Spray. So it's been a fair few years at least. So it was quite nice getting back into it, and it's mostly comfortable to play. I'm also doing a playthrough of Remake at the same time. So one thing that's a real issue is that why are the controls between 2 games that are functionally the same different, even though they were released in the same year for the same system? Why, oh why? Like, that was my first big struggle, was to get over the fact, run and it was different, and whether aim and fire were different, and inventory is different, and swap and it was just like a nightmare. Why didn't you sync up with the other team and be like, this is the control scheme we're just going to do across the board for these 2 games, since they're coming out for the same system in the same year? Very frustrating, but that's a minor thing.
Why is the square button the menu when start could be the menu? That feels so much more sensible. It has been for every other game
triangle.
in the franchise. Or
triangle. Like triangle is always the inventory to me, so the fact that it's square now was devastating to my brain. Took a long time of undoing some stuff that I taught myself. When I got there, it's fine. But then, of course, there are a bunch of other issues. And I really have to wonder if the sort of removal of item boxes was a realism thing, or like, what was the idea behind that? It's a hilarious idea that it is a realism thing. We don't need magical item boxes that transfer your item from space to space, because of course we have a magical elevator that does that now, so I don't think it can be a realism thing. But the net positive of that choice is nothing. It doesn't allow the player to do anything new or different. Now you can drop something at a moment's notice and come back to it if you need to. Isn't really much different to me going, oh crap, I can't pick up this key item, I'll have to come back later once I've gone to the item box and made some space. Except now you sub the words item box to the main hall of the facility. Like, it's literally the same thing, you've just turned a room into it. So if anything, it's the same or worse or more annoying. Possibly due to the fact there are so many items that are 2 slots and that kind of thing, and the various aspects that come with juggling it, which I think the 2 character thing is fine. I think the juggling of inventories gets kind of irritating when it asks you to be strategic about it. And like I said about the laboratory, that's kind of fun. It bogs down the game. I think stuff takes a lot longer because of it. The lab stuff, like where you're moving stuff around the dumbwaiter, depending on who you take where and whatever, can take ages because you could be ferrying down loads of items. As a concept, I'm interested. I don't think they pulled it off. But James, where are you at with the gameplay for this?
I will give it to Capcom for at least trying something new with the partner system. Like,
sure,
but it's poo. It's really bad. Like, it's cool how the game changes, like, based on which character you have. They even have, like, hidden stats. That's right up my alley. I love that stuff, But the AI is wild. Sometimes they move by themselves. They ruin your puzzles sometimes. They even ruin your movement sometimes. They just get in the way. Most of the time, I'm sat there just herding them. You know, depending on who I'm on, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, just switch to the other character." Okay, I'll switch to the other character. Okay, now I have the other character being a nuisance, and then I have to deal with scene changing, and then I have to deal with a fixed camera angle, and I also want to pick up the thing on the ground. You know, like it's just too many things like that you have to think about at one time, and I get what they're trying to do. Very cool, but you should have just made it co-op. You know, like it's. And I can't not really talk about the inventory system as well. Why does a pause menu, I say that with big capitals, have to be this complicated?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I get in recent games, you know, having a live inventory system and it being complicated because it's meant to give you tension.
Yeah.
But when you have a pause menu that opens up your inventory, there is no reason to make it complex. No reason at all. Like I look back at Steve. I think Steve is one of the best people to play video games with because Steve has a sponge of a
citation
mind
needed
for video games. Like I look back at Steve and I's playthrough of this game today, and even Steve was having trouble moving around this game and getting around and remembering things and how to do inventory. I remember when we were playing, I would pick up the pad. Right? And Steve would have to take over because it's like, wait a second, I need to redo this because you're going to mess yourself up later on. You know, and I'm like, I completely get that. I completely see that because I've got 250 handgun bullets and I don't know where to put them. You know,
look, I'm a very protectful parent, James. I've got to make sure your lunch pack's all sorted out and you're ready for school. That's how it goes.
So you're gonna get more handgun bullets, and you're gonna need those 2 slots for a shotgun later on. But before you get that shotgun, you're gonna have to make room for the hook shot. Right, and between that time, you're going to have to also fight about 5 different zombies, you know, and it was tough. Again, this is one other thing I don't think they thought about in testing. Mm-hmm. They didn't think about this kind of stuff. They go, oh yeah, this is a really cool idea. Print it. You know, and they didn't even think about it. It was just needlessly complex and I hated it. And it ruined a lot of my experience with this game.
You talk about navigating the menu, like being irritating. Yeah. The amount of times where, so you can obviously switch your character's sort of behavior. The other character that's with you, if you're playing as Rebecca, you can sort of tell Billy, in the menu, I want you to be idle or follow me. But more importantly, I want you to fire your weapon or not. And if your other character is following you has all the heavy weapon, you don't want them firing grenades at zombies and stuff. That's very important to have. Just fiddling your way over to that menu to switch it to idle. So many times I'm like, no, I've left the inventory accidentally instead. Like, it's just everything in this game feels like it was built to annoy you. Like, several of the puzzles, like the box pushing puzzle in the water treatment facility was so irritating. The different controls falls into this. The hook shot is like the mascot of this game being just a pain in the arse. Of this 2 slot item that you need to remember to go pick up before certain points in the game that's not telegraphed. Just so much of this game is annoying and not tense, just annoying.
Yeah, the only time I felt tense in this game where I was going down a silent corridor, that's because I had nothing to worry about other than feeling tense.
Yeah.
And then when I got into a room and there was 2 hunters and an item on the other side of the room, I was thinking, oh crap, how am I going to deal with it in my inventory system? And also my other partner who cannot think by themselves, apparently.
Showen, how did you get on with the gameplay of Zero?
I think it's the best game in the series.
I
can't say that. I mean, obviously, the majority of the stuff running around is absolutely fine. It's a Resident Evil game. Forgetting the different button mapping right for a second. Mm-hmm. You can tell that this game was made, I'm reasonably sure, before Resident Evil Remake, because it's just missing several quality of life things. I do remember when this came out thinking, why is there no defense items?
Yeah.
Why have I not? Yeah. Why am I not setting fire to bodies? Why is all this other stuff that was in the remake not in this? And it just feels like an older game. Is the honest answer. Like if this game had come out, I don't know, a year or 2 before remake, then that would absolutely make sense, and you'd look at it and go, okay, cool. The fact that they end up coming out side by side, pretty much, is the issue. But accepting that and moving on to the larger points, and I won't really address a lot of the stuff you guys have said about puzzles and things. Although I must admit, I don't really remember being that annoyed about the puzzles, so meh. But for me, it's the missed opportunity that is the so the items, for example, right? So I think I've searched my feelings, much like Luke, and the only thing I can get to is this idea that, the people express frustration with, well, sometimes we find an item while we're wandering around and we can't pick it up because stupid, the game's got this much inventory space and I should just be able to put something down if I don't want it anymore and grab this. Cool. Fair enough. Sounds great sounds great on paper. Adds that extra element of realism. That's really cool, interesting, sounds great. Except what you're missing is the gameplay that is, I found this item, I really need this item, okay, crap. So much of Resident Evil is backtracking through an area that you know is really dangerous and you don't want to go back. And that's the gameplay you miss out by going, you can just pick up whatever on the fly. Because now you go, oh, I'll just dump this thing in here then, and then I'll pick up this thing, and no, I don't have to do that journey back, which takes away some of the tension. And it introduces a new legacy problem, which is now I find the way to the new area. This happens a lot in this game because the areas aren't so all-inclusive. And now I need to spend a whole bunch of time ferrying things backwards and forwards, which is often through safe areas. And even if it is through a dangerous area, is more often than not just boring. Like, it's just dull. Like, oh, I've got these things. Cool. I'm now going to spend 20 minutes wandering from one save room, which is my sort of base of operations, to the next base of operations, and then back again. And I'm going to make weird patterns on the floor of how things are all laid out. And I think that eats into some of what that experience is, which sucks. It's the same with the zapping idea. Really cool idea. You have two characters walking around and it's awesome. And yeah, there's some puzzles which work interestingly with that, but they feel really like crowbarred in to illustrate the point of what that is. And you don't really get anything out of that because they already kind of had that element with cutscenes before. It's a problem that didn't need to be solved that they're trying to solve or trying to introduce a cool mechanic, and it's a swing and a miss. Because the only real, like the thing that I do very much remember exactly what Steve said is you find somewhere safe, dump your character there, and then run around and do everything with the other one. Mm-hmm. Except every so often you get that annoying thing where suddenly some burst of the radio sort of static happens and it's like, Billy, help! And then you go back to Rebecca to discover a zombie's corpse is on the floor, she's got less health than she did before, and she got attacked. And you're in a save room. You're like, well, zombies don't come in save rooms, so how did that happen? Well, I guess it's a mechanic because I left that character unattended for too long, so the game's giving me punishment for it. But there's no incentive to go out and use both characters. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest problem. It's, as James said, if we'd released this game later on, it would be an awesome, it would be like the most amazing two-player Resident Evil game where there's two people playing this thing and they're both running around the mansion at the same time or whatever, doing their objectives. That'd be really cool. Really, really, really cool. And that's probably what this game needs to be. In that way, it's much like Outbreak. It's something where, brilliant idea, not ready. The world was not ready for this. And as a result, the game suffers. And I think that's, for me, that's the issue with it. Like, it's missing a few quality of life things, which is the most noticeable part for me. And there's a couple of interesting concepts which should probably have just stayed as concepts. Mm. And the sad point is, just following off, they're kind of the selling points of what this game is.
Right.
Which is where it really falls flat.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And I think because you have those two characters at once, there was a certain amount of we need to make these characters more separated than they have been, like a Leon and a Claire, or a Krista and a Jill. But they didn't really do that. They just go, yeah, you have the lighter and you're buff because you're the man. Rebecca can throw items faster. And, I don't know, let's just make Billy an idiot. He's the only man in the series who can't mix herbs together. Just to give Rebecca something to do. It's like, I don't know. There's just so much more they could have done with the system. But yeah, it just feels like, right, they went, here's a basic idea. We don't need to build out from that at all. That just can be the bare bones of it. Which is a real shame. And it is one of those things where when this game comes up, people complain about the item box thing and complain about the having to navigate around using two characters, it being a negative rather than a positive, or what makes the game refreshing, it bogs it down instead, which is a real shame. Let's, towards the end now, talk about aesthetics. I think we might hopefully sort of end on a more positive note, because I think aesthetically the game has a lot of positive things to talk about. James, how do you feel about the way that Resident Evil Zero looks?
Ever since I first saw this game, it's a knockout title in terms of how it looks. It looks so good. I remember playing it for the first time with Steve and seeing those leeches for the first time and thinking, whoa. And that was in 2018. I was blown away by how good they looked. Like, it holds up really, really well as well. Like the leeches, the bugs, even the water effects at some parts, because there are some points where the water just kind of looks dumb. You can tell that the art team really and the dev team really put the work into how good and how gross it all looked. Like, I did love how it looks. Like, you got the pre-rendered backgrounds as well. They look fantastic. There's like one scene that always sticks in my mind actually with the pre-rendered, and that's the forklift. There's like a forklift you have to put Rebecca on and then lift up with Billy. And I don't know why it sticks in my mind, but it just looks so good. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, I've been around these all my life. And I could just imagine that being... I know it's a forklift, right? But I could just imagine it being a photo on my wall, just this forklift in a dilapidated... Yeah, it spoke to me for some reason. But I do wish... and this is going to be a new player and there's going to be a new person into Resident Evil problem, right? So please take that if you listen to this and take offense, right? But I wish the camera and interactive items were more seamless, because splitting between 3 scenes to pick up a green herb is horrendous. I hate it. And then I would have to finally tune my character to be within pickup distance, only to pick up the hookshot 4 feet away. It was infuriating. Like, I would be directly over the thing. I could see it. It was there. And I have never had a worse time picking things up in a video game in my life. It was like, even Steve at one point saw me doing it. It was like, what? Why did you pick that? It just didn't make any sense. And by the way, if you like accidentally drop something behind something, good luck getting that back. Because you won't see it. You can't see it. Like, it's gone forever. Sure, you can go into your map and you can see it's there, but if you
try
put
to
it
line
behind the
yourself
table,
up with it.
You have to put things like directly in front of like an open space. I love the visuals of this game. I just wish they're a bit more consistent with the character.
That's fair. I think this is one of the best looking games in the series, to be quite honest. I think it's stunning to look at. I think the pre-rendered backgrounds are amazing. At times, I would almost go so far as to say that some of them are better than Remake in terms of quality. I don't think they have, because of the game's sort of lack of standout locations, it means they fall shy of being quite as memorable or iconic as remakes. But the level of detail in some of these is great. Yeah, we talked about atmosphere earlier. A lot of that comes from the visuals and the sound of this game. That's where the strength of the locations does come through. Going through it recently, I couldn't map out the location in my brain because of gameplay reasons. But going into the areas, I was like, oh yeah, it's this bit. I love this room. And the lab looks great. I think even the water treatment facility, even though by that point you've seen enough grey and brown for the rest of your life, there are some really good framed pre-rendered backgrounds. And I think the character models are good. And the FMVs feel a little bit blurry and muddy in places for me. Like, they're quite good, high quality. But they got a weird kind of, maybe it's just me, a blur to them in the HD remaster. It just looks a little odd. Sherwin, where are you at with the visuals for Resident Evil 0?
It's a beautiful game. It's that's the only thing really to add to it. Really, I think we already kind of touched on it earlier with the atmosphere of what the game is, or has. As you guys have said, it's just it's a beautiful, beautiful game. It's everything I want from what a Resident Evil game should look like, and I genuinely, there's not much else beyond that sort of very obvious strapline. Beyond me double checking, we are going to talk about the soundtrack, right?
Yeah, we
because
are.
otherwise
Don't
I
you
will
worry.
rebel. But yeah, I'll literally just rage quit this now. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful game. Move on, Steve. So I've got more time to talk about the soundtrack later.
Steve, what do you think of the aesthetics of Zero? Let's do while you're there, since you're last to go on visuals, open us up on audio as well.
Okay, well, all right then. So visually speaking, same as the rest of the class. I think it's stunning. Generally speaking, out of all the pre-rendered Resident Evil games, this is easily one of the best looking, if not it is that much of a contender. I especially love the cheeky FMVs they put in to try and make things look that little bit more alive than, say, Remake 1 did. Like, for example, just water running.
Great
There's a few
shout.
moths flowing around, especially like when the train's in motion. The
You
inside
see
of
the
the cars.
chandeliers moving, can't you?
Yeah. There's a lot more dynamicism
Cloud
going
on
on.
top.
Yeah, outside the training facility where you push a box has got like the massive windswept detail of swaying trees, and it's pretty nice. It's pretty tasty. It's pretty good. The complete insanity of standing on top of a moving train in a rainstorm aside, it actually looks pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
I may have issues with the narrative, but clearly all the story writers were instead working on the FMVs, so I'll take it. It works. Musically, again, a complete upturn from the rest of the podcast. Some of the best in the entire franchise. I can't place all of it, but I can safely say Save Room theme, and I'm normally a Save Room theme decrier. I think they're overapplauded. One of the best. Boss musics, again, pretty decent. The only ones I can't stand, oddly enough, are the iconic Leechman stuff, because pan flutes, they just irritate me, although at least it does have a distinct sound to itself. The widdly widdlies. An identity to a creature is a novel concept you don't see enough of these days. I'll take it. Monsters sound monster-like. I'm not going to go too much into the phonetics of that. And hunters still creep me out with the clicks.
Audio for me, fairly in line with what you're saying. I will add on to that I think the sound effects in the inventory are really satisfying, even though I hated at times navigating that inventory. The clicks and clacks of it are very memorable to me. Really nice sound. But yeah, the music's outstanding, terrifying stuff. Great save room theme, one of my favourites as well. As people know, I could do without crazy flute music in my life, but you're absolutely on the money, I think, in terms of giving a creature a unique theme and a unique sound is a really, really cool thing. So I'm absolutely down for that. Other sound effects I think are pretty strong. You guys didn't talk about the plague crawler enough for my money. I also say that the sound effect that it makes is great.
Do you just love bugs, Si? I'm just sorry.
Well, yes. We know. I'm literally staring at my caterpillars right now as I talk about this because they're giving me the evil eye if I don't talk them up. So, the plague crawlers, disgusting, horrible things, I will say, as someone that despises cockroaches in real life. So to 180 on that. The sound they make off screen is horrible. Like when you can't see them and they're upstairs where you fight the Centurion, for example. Very much sort of put me on edge. So big fan of that awful noise. But yeah, for sound is definitely one of the strong points of Zero, certainly. Sherwin, let's go to you. Audio's naff then, yeah?
Mate, this is why I'm here. Arguably, this is the best soundtrack in the series. It's so good. It's, I think, the thing that makes it, and bearing in mind it's not the best because it can't possibly beat Marsh. It hasn't got Marshall in the Yard in it, but or City of Ruin. But it's so inventive. I agree with you, Steve. I despise the Leechman soundtrack parts, but that's because they are brilliantly done. I just despise them because they hurt your ears. But I think way back 1,000 years ago when I was young, I think we actually did Now That's What I Call Survival Horror on this. So
we certainly did. It's available now on the YouTube and possibly the podcast feed. I don't know.
Yeah, other things are available, but go listen. But yeah, no, it's and I think part of what makes this so brilliant is the way that it melds in sounds that aren't made by musical instruments into what the soundtrack is. There's loads of ambient stuff in here. There's loads of stuff that shouldn't belong. And it just melds them so effortlessly into a whole bunch of different themes and a whole bunch of different melodies and everything else. And it just comes across as a true survival horror experience, because it is just a selection of... There is some faint strains of music that come in, and they are absolutely brilliant when they are, but there's also a whole bunch of random noises and random collection of things that literally sound like I'm walking around a place and I am scared, because any sound I hear could be a footstep, could be a thing that's bashing against the wall somewhere, could be something trying to find me to kill me. And it's so eerie, it's so isolating, it's so atmospheric, it's brilliant. Utterly brilliant. Wonderful. So yeah, I think that for me is exceptional. And it's also got the main training facility main hall is possibly one of the best pieces of music in all of Resident Evil.
Oh, it's so haunting. It's amazing.
It's utterly amazing. If I had to have one song playing through my day for the entirety of the rest of my life, I'm good if it's that. To be honest, just walking around, that's playing in the background anywhere I go. It would be amazing to walk around a shopping mall with that playing in the background.
You'd definitely be setting a mood wherever you go, wouldn't you? So
exactly it. It's utterly brilliant. Like I can't. Yeah, the soundtrack is exceptional.
James, what are your thoughts on the audio?
Yeah, so I just like everybody else said, like the save room theme this is one of my favorite save room themes.
Yep.
Especially since the rest of this game is very tense.
He also says,
and you normally come across the save room theme after you are going through these long, isolated, lonely corridors, and you're hearing like the buzz or the chittering of those bugs, or around you. And there's also like really disgusting wet sounds in this game. Like the leeches make some fantastic sound. So like hearing that like just melodic, piece of music come through is really calming. I put in my notes, it feels like a cold towel on a hot day when I go into a save room. But other than that, I think everybody else said this. I always say this, but like Capcom always do really well with the sounds in their games, like fires, like pot shots and animal sounds and stuff like that. So I don't want to go too deep into that because they just always get it right. But yeah, that's what I have to say about audio and music.
Okay, in that case, let's wrap this baby up with some conclusions on Resident Evil 0. How do we feel about it overall? It's been, a really interesting discussion. So I'm curious to see where everyone lands on it, because there's been lots of mixed opinions throughout. James, let's start with you. What are your final thoughts on Resident Evil 0? Where does it rank for you?
It's not perfect. It's not at all. It has got charm. They're very limited. Like, they're mostly Billy and Rebecca shaped for me, though. The atmosphere is fantastic. It's top notch. The partner system is not, and the inventory system is a nightmare. But it did try to do something new, which I can respect to a certain point. The bottom line for me really is it's not the best in the series, but it is an important piece of the puzzle. Like you said at the beginning, it is an important game. Like it should be played by... I do think it should be played by fans of the series as well. Whether you hate it or you like it, there will be something in it you'll like, you'll enjoy. Just like brace yourself for some frustration along the way that is most likely monkey-shaped.
That's fair. That is fair. Showing, speaking of monkey paws, apparently, where do you land on 0?
Well, I like the idea that the Illuminator is my spirit animal. That's quite funny. So, amazing soundtrack, amazing visuals, amazing atmosphere. In terms of the potential, in terms of, hey, go see what happened first before the rest, before the Spencer Mansion incident. Awesome. Absolutely brilliant there. And it's a classic survival horror game, which, if you ignore the story arc, which is just garbage, is absent all of the goofiness. It is, after Code Veronica, it's exactly what I wanted in a Resident Evil game. This was a real, like, at the time, I was really, really hyped about it. I was really, really excited about playing this game. The opening piece, I should have said this in the music section actually, the opening piece of music is terrifyingly crap. But that's neither here nor there. That every time I hear that, it takes me back to the end of the 90s / the start of the 2000s, and not in a good way. But it's, yeah. However, in reflection, like, yeah, there's many parts that are bad about it as there are good. You know, some of the control system doesn't bother me as much as everybody else. But I feel like, I think of the Proto-Tyrant, that beaten up, knackered, sort of just riddled, crippled creature that's just staggering around, desperately trying to be, you know, he's coolest guy in the room, but is really, really hard done by. That's us trying to enjoy Resident Evil 0.
That's fair, actually.
That's my best way of describing this thing. I am the Proto-Tyrant. I'm lurching through trying to make the best I possibly can of this, but I am playing Resident Evil 0.
Steve, what are your final thoughts on 0?
Oh, God, I had a full diatribe ready, but I'm still kind of struck by Famitsu giving it a 38 out of 40.
Crazy,
like,
isn't
an
it?
8 out of 10 IGN. What are you playing at? I mean, I love Resident Evil games. This podcast is all about our celebration of these games, but I feel like this is one that I would play out of being a fan, almost out of obligation. It's a 5 out of 10 if I was to give it a numerical vibe. You know, not 98%, not crumbs. There's that many issues and things that throw it kind of off, that just ruin the atmosphere. The music's great, the aesthetics are great, the combat's rough. Any new ideas they bring to the table, except for maybe the idea of a train setting, kind of a mixed bag. The promise of learning stuff about Raccoon City and Rockfort Island and the island that would become the second Raccoon City, Sheena Island, completely by the wayside and the world will burn in an inferno of hate. It's terrible in that regard. Like, narratively, it's a missed opportunity. I still kind of like Rebecca and Billy, though. You know, I can't hate them for too long. I hope to see them both again. Be it the Rebecca we know, or the Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield hybrid that she is in this. Either way, I'm not going to shut the door on the characters. I just might only play this out of an obligation every once in a while.
Yeah, as I said, I enjoyed playing it again, as I don't play it very often, and it's like, hey, it's one of these kinds of games that I like, but it has some weird stuff onto it that I kind of have to bash my head against sometimes. Unfortunately, for all the good that it does do, and there is highlights that we've talked about through this, it does as many bad things or worse, I think. It's tough for me to say whether it's a play with obligation kind of game or not, because I still enjoyed it, but I wonder if that's just because I love fixed camera Resident Evil. I've got a soft spot for that, and it being a little bit of an underdog. That said, if I didn't make this clear enough, that moment where you bump into Enrico kind of broke me a little bit. Like, everything fell apart for a game that's 22 years old, and I've played it several times through before. It was like all over again. I was like, this is just absolute nonsense. And for it to be such a linchpin in the Resident Evil story arc, and it to be about singing leeches, it's not good. Like, it's a shame that forever when people are like, I'm going to play the Resident Evil series, I've never played it before, where do I start? Oh, 0. Let's start with 0, it's the beginning. It's like, do you know what? No, 0 is definitely the game you come to much later on when you're a fan and you have to just see what it is. And heck, maybe you'll fall in love with it, or maybe you'll just have a very mixed experience like we all did. Something like that. Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our Patreons, and our listeners. Join the First Aid Spray Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and more. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merch or at patreon.com/FA Spray Pod for as little as $1 a month. in our next episode. Remember Resident Evil Infinite Darkness? It's back in comic book form. Yes, indeed, we I wrote recent, but the series ran from 2022 to 2024. Infinite Darkness, the beginning, as part of our Comic Club series. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Cyniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda. And James is back on Twitter at MoistOwletOFF. And finally, thank you for listening, and have a good week.
There we go. Better than
Zero.
Zero.
How it goes. Zero.
Zero.
What it always is in my head. Resident Evil Zero.
Oh,
Okay.
no. All the file readings need to be like in the Uwu voice.
Nah, within your file.
My job is crap.
Someone, we need to redo all of like the Keeper's Diary like that.
Albert
Yeah.
and
Scholarship wheel.
Will.
Yeah, amazing.
It's tasty.